The banquet hall glittered like a palace of glass and gold. Diamonds flashed from the wrists of queens, oil ministers toasted with crystal goblets, and professors flown in from every corner of the world mingled under chandeliers. At the center of it all stood Khalid Al-Mansour, the Arab CEO whose empire stretched from Dubai to New York. His reputation? Ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. And tonight he wanted to prove it. With a clap of his hands, the music stopped. The laughter faded. All eyes turned to him as a massive blackboard on golden wheels was rolled into the room by attendants. It was enormous, stretching nearly floor to ceiling, filled edge to edge with chalk equations that looked like a storm of numbers and Greek symbols. Whispers ran through the crowd. What is that? Equations? Is this physics? It looks like thermodynamics. Khalid's lips curled into a smirk. He spread his arms and declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not about wealth, but wisdom. I present to you a challenge. A single problem in thermodynamics. Solve it, and I will give you $700 million. The room erupted in gasps. Some laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. But Khalid snapped his fingers, and a spotlight illuminated the problem on the towering board. In a closed system where temperature gradients remain constant and non-ideal gas conditions apply, calculate the entropy generation and prove whether true equilibrium is achievable. Justify using Clausius inequality." The professors in the room exchanged nervous glances. Engineers pulled out notepads, scribbling frantically. A Saudi prince muttered, "That's doctoral level? No, postdoctoral." Khalid chuckled darkly. "For 10 years, I've placed this problem before the brightest minds, MIT, Oxford, Tokyo. None have solved it. If one of you succeeds tonight, $700 million will be wired into your account before dawn." The crowd buzzed with both excitement and fear. A handful of mathematicians rushed forward to the board, chalk in hand. One started writing furiously, then froze halfway through, sweat dripping down his temple. Another erased his work in frustration. The board was a graveyard of half solutions and broken attempts. Khalid leaned back in his seat, laughing. "You see? Brains bend, but not all can break through the wall of genius." In the corner of the hall, nearly invisible in her black and white maid's uniform, Amina balanced a silver tray of champagne flutes. She had been ignored all night, treated as furniture by the elite. But her eyes were fixed on the board. The equations weren't chaos to her. They were music. As she walked past a table of dignitaries, she murmured almost unconsciously, "Entropy generation is unavoidable unless the system is completely isolated. Clausius inequality requires a correction factor here." Her whisper was quiet, but it cut through the tension like lightning. A professor standing nearby whipped his head around, stunned. His pen dropped from his hand. What did you just say?" Guest turned, confused. Waiters froze mid-step. And slowly the room, a room filled with billionaires, scientists, princes, and politicians, went silent. All eyes turned to the black maid standing with a tray in her hands, her lips slightly parted, her gaze locked on the board. And Khalid himself narrowed his eyes. His smirk faded into something sharper. Because the words she had spoken were not the babble of a servant. They were the key, the very first step of the solution that no one in that room had been able to find in 10 years. The billionaire CEO who mocked the world now found himself staring at the woman he considered invisible. And the game had just changed. Imagine standing in that room, mocked, underestimated, treated as invisible. Would you speak up and risk humiliation, or keep silent while $700 million hung in the balance? Drop your answer in the comments, backhand index pointing down. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Long before the glitter of the ballroom and the weight of a billion eyes, Amina Yusuf had lived a very different life. She grew up in small, African town, the eldest of 5 children in a small, crowded apartment above her father's mechanic shop. Her mother was a schoolteacher, Her father a dreamer who believed education could break chains that money could not. While other children played in the street, Amina sat on the roof with battered textbooks, teaching herself equations under the dim glow of lanterns when power outages blacked out the city. From the start, she had a gift. Numbers weren't numbers to her, they were stories. Heat transfer wasn't abstract. She imagined molecules dancing, colliding, trading energy like whispers in the dark. By 14, she was solving equations that stumped her teachers. By 17, she won a national science prize that carried her name across newspapers. Her dream was clear: to study physics at the highest level, to push the boundaries of energy and systems, to one day create technology that could light up villages like her own without relying on broken grids and empty promises. And she almost had it. At 19, she earned a scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities in Europe. But dreams, she learned, collide with reality. Her father died suddenly in an accident at the workshop. Debt collectors circled her family like vultures. Her scholarship covered tuition, yes, but not the endless costs of survival abroad: food, rent, transport, bills. And her family needed money back home. So Amina made a choice. She kept her scholarship but worked in secret, cleaning houses, waiting tables, scrubbing hotel floors. And when she moved to Dubai for a master's fellowship, the only place that had accepted her despite her struggles, she found herself again taking jobs that required her hands, not her mind. That's how she ended up at the Al Mansur Tower, serving as a maid in the very empire of a man who didn't know her name. She wore her uniform with dignity, but behind her quiet movements was a storm. A woman who knew she was capable of rewriting the very equations of energy, yet was reduced to wiping champagne spills from gold-plated floors. Every night, when the mansion was silent, she would sneak into her room, pull out old textbooks, and solve problems until dawn. It wasn't ambition anymore. It was survival. Solving kept her mind alive. It reminded her who she was. And now, in that banquet hall, fate had brought her face to face with the kind of equation she had whispered into notebooks since she was a child. The irony was cruel. The room was filled with richest, CEOs, ministers, and Khalid himself, all convinced a maid was incapable of understanding a single symbol on that board. Yet Amina could see the path clear as sunlight. But fear gripped her. One misstep, one wrong word, and she'd be laughed at, dismissed, perhaps even fired. Who was she, a maid, to challenge men who built empires? Still, the numbers sang in her head. Her father's voice echoed from the past: never let the world tell you your mind is small. Even a lion cub knows it will roar one day. And as the silence in the banquet hall deepened, she stood at the edge of a choice. Stay invisible, or step into the fire. What would you do if you had brilliance inside you, but the world only saw your uniform? Would you hide your talent to survive, or fight to be seen? Share your answer below. Backhand index pointing down. The banquet hall had never been so silent. Amina's whispered correction, the one detail that shifted the impossible thermodynamics puzzle into solvable ground, still hung in the air like a spark waiting for flame. At first, the guests thought they had misheard. But the professor, who had been sweating over his notepad, stood frozen, eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't breathe. Finally, he managed to stammer. She just said the key to Clausius inequality. Heads snapped toward him, then toward Amina. A maid, someone scoffed. Impossible, another laughed nervously. Did she just guess? Khalid al-Mansur rose slowly from his seat, his imposing figure commanding the stage. His smirk returned, but there was something sharper in his eyes now, a flicker of intrigue buried beneath arrogance. You, he said, his deep voice echoing. He pointed directly at Amina. Step forward. The tray trembled in her hands. She froze. No one had ever singled her out like this before, not in this world of wealth and dominance. Come. Khalid's tone carried an edge of challenge, almost amusement. If you dare to speak equations in my hall, then let us all hear them. The crowd tittered. Some laughed outright. A black maid solving this? It was a joke to them. But others leaned forward, curious. They had seen the confidence in her eyes, even if she tried to hide it. Amina's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to shrink, to vanish into the marble floor. But then she remembered her father's words, remembered nights of hunger, remembered her siblings waiting back home for the money she sent each month. She inhaled. And then, slowly, she set the tray down on a nearby table and stepped forward. Every footstep echoed. The sea of eyes followed her like 1,000 spotlights. When she reached the towering board filled with half-finished attempts, she hesitated, chalk in hand. Khalid folded his arms. $700 million for the right answer. But understand, one mistake, and the world will know you as a fool forever. A cruel murmur of laughter rippled through the crowd. Her hand shook slightly as she raised the chalk. She could almost feel her father's voice steadying her. Courage is not the absence of fear, Amina. It is doing what you must, even while fear breathes down your neck. The first line she wrote was steady. Then the second. By the third, her trembling stopped. The hall grew quieter with each symbol she drew. Equations balanced, arrows traced, entropy inequalities took form. Her soft voice rose as she explained. Entropy generation cannot vanish unless the system is perfectly isolated. Under non-ideal conditions, equilibrium is impossible without correction. But if you apply Clausius inequality properly, you'll see. She stepped back and underlined the final expression. That the total entropy generation must equal this value. The board was complete, elegant. A professor in the audience gasped, clutching his head. Another whispered, That's correct. That's the missing link. The crowd erupted, some in disbelief, some in awe, some in anger that a maid had dared humiliate them. And at the center of it all, Khalid Al-Mansour stared at her, expression unreadable. For the first time in years, the billionaire had been caught off guard. The maid had solved the unsolvable. And nothing in that hall, in his empire, in his pride, would ever be the same. The banquet hall buzzed like a hive cracked open. Billionaires muttered angrily, professors argued in whispers, and investors craned their necks to study the lines of chalk Amina had drawn on the great board. Is this possible? One gasped. It's correct. By God, it's correct, a professor muttered, his voice trembling. A maid? She must have memorized it somehow, another scoffed. Khalid Al-Mansour rose slowly from his seat. His presence alone quieted the storm of voices. He walked toward the massive board, his polished shoes striking the marble with sharp, deliberate clicks. He stopped just behind Amina, towering over her. So, he said softly, his tone carrying equal parts amusement and suspicion, a maid believes she has solved what the world's brightest minds could not. Amina's grip tightened on the chalk. Her throat was dry, but she lifted her chin. Not believes. Knows. The words, though quiet, rippled through the air like a challenge. Gasps rose again. A few guests chuckled nervously at her audacity. Khalid's lips curved into a thin smile. Very bold. He turned to the audience. But let us not be hasty. Perhaps our maid has memorized formulas. Perhaps she has repeated the words of professors without grasping their meaning. He clapped his hands, and attendants wheeled in a second board, blank this time. Khalid gestured to it. Let us see if lightning strikes twice. On the spot, he scrawled another set of equations, more brutal, more layered than the first. Symbols of Gibbs free energy, entropy derivatives with respect to pressure, enthalpy differentials twisted like a labyrinth. He finished with a flourish, tossing the chalk aside. Prove this relationship, he commanded. If you are what you claim to be, Maid, you will not tremble before real complexity. The crowd leaned in. This was no longer a game. This was humiliation bait, designed to crush her, to remind her of her place. Amina stood frozen, eyes scanning the monstrous equation. She could feel the weight of hundreds watching, waiting for her to fail. Breathe, she told herself. It's only numbers. Numbers never lie. She stepped forward, picked up the chalk again and began. At first, the room whispered. Then it hushed. Because once again, her hand moved with confidence. Enthalpy is not independent here, she explained softly. You must express it in terms of entropy and pressure. Then the correction emerges. Line after line formed with precision, each step unlocking the next. Her voice gained strength, and the symbols unfolded like a map only she could see. Minutes later, she circled the final result. Silence. Then, a slow clap. One professor rose to his feet, eyes glistening. Brilliant. Perfect derivation. It's flawless. The audience erupted. Some cheered, some protested, some whispered in awe. And Khalid? For the first time that night, his smile faltered. This was no trick. No parroted phrase. The maid had done what his own panel of scientists could not. Twice. And yet, instead of congratulating her, Khalid's eyes darkened. He leaned closer, his voice low enough only she could hear. No one humiliates me in my own house. The words were silk-wrapped in steel. Amina's heart thudded. She had won the battle, but something told her the war had just begun. What do you think Khalid will do now? Will he honor his promise and pay Amina, or find a way to twist the game against her? Comment below, your guess matters. Backhand index pointing down. The applause still echoed faintly in the vaulted ceiling, but the energy in the room had shifted. Amina stood tall before the board, chalk dust clinging to her fingers like proof of her victory. Yet Khalid Al-Mansur remained utterly still. His gaze lingered on the equations, then slid to her. The faint smile returned, but it was no longer amusement. It was calculation. Well, he said slowly, his voice carrying through the hall. It appears our maid has done the impossible. Twice. The guests buzzed. Some cheered, others sneered, but all waited for the inevitable moment, the billionaire reaching for his checkbook, honoring his promise. Instead, Khalid's eyes hardened. And yet, I will not pay you. The hall erupted in gasps. Amina's head snapped toward him. What? You solved it, yes. But a challenge without conditions is nothing. Did I not say? He raised his hand, reminding them. One mistake and the world would know you as a fool. The inverse, too, is true. To claim my reward, you must prove not only your mind, but your worth. His words hung like a blade. Gasps turned into murmurs. Some guests nodded in approval, others shook their heads in disgust. This is cheating, one professor muttered under his breath. Arrogant man, hissed another. Amina's pulse thundered. You made a promise, she said, her voice trembling with anger. Khalid leaned closer, lowering his tone so only she and those near the front could hear. Promises are for equals, girl. You are not my equal. Not yet. He straightened, addressing the hall. If you truly are worthy of 700 million, then prove yourself beyond symbols on a board. I propose a second test. Not abstract. Not theoretical. Real. He snapped his fingers, and attendants rolled in a massive metal contraption, a transparent chamber wired with sensors, tubes, and heat panels. The crowd gasped at the sight. This, Khalid explained, is a prototype from my energy division. It has baffled every engineer I employ. The problem? Stabilizing entropy during staged compression. Solve it here, in real time, with the machine before you. Show us that you are not just a parrot of books, but a true master of thermodynamics. The guests erupted into chatter. A live demonstration. No room for faking, no safety net. Khalid turned to her, his eyes glinting like a predator's. Do this, and perhaps you are worth not just 700 million, but more. Fail? He let the pause linger, deadly. And you are nothing. A maid who got lucky. A servant who forgot her place. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Amina stared at the chamber, her chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. This wasn't chalk and equations anymore. This was raw application, with hundreds of eyes, cameras flashing, skeptics waiting for her to trip. Her mind screamed at her to step back, to walk away, to save herself the humiliation. But another voice, deeper, stronger, whispered in her bones. You've solved harder problems in the dark. This is your moment. Take it. Her father's words returned once more. Even a lion cub knows it will roar one day. She lifted her chin, locked eyes with Khalid, and said firmly, Bring me the schematics. The hall exploded with gasps. The battle had shifted. This was no longer just a game of pride. It was war. Do you think Khalid is trying to break Amina, or secretly test her genius to recruit her? What's your take? Drop your thoughts below, backhand index pointing down. The banquet hall transformed into a silent arena. The towering glass chamber gleamed under golden chandeliers, its coils humming faintly, pressure gauges twitching as though mocking every failed engineer who had stood before it. Khalid's voice rang out like a sentence. 700 million stands between her hands and her mind. Let us see if genius survives outside of chalk and theory. Cameras flashed. Guests leaned in. Some sneered, others murmured in anticipation, but all were united in one thing. They wanted a spectacle. And Amina was at the center of it. Her palms were damp as she accepted the schematics, flipping through page after page of complex diagrams. Her chest tightened. The system wasn't just advanced, it was messy, incomplete, almost sabotaged. Heat exchangers misaligned, entropy stabilizers missing key data, variables left undefined. This is deliberate, she whispered under her breath. Khalid, leaning against his chair, smirked. What was that? Amina looked up, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You didn't give me a puzzle. You gave me a trap. The room erupted in whispers. Some nodded knowingly, others scoffed. Khalid's smirk widened. And if you are truly worthy, Maid, then a trap should not scare you. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the chamber, tracing the machine with her eyes, imagining the flow of energy inside, the chaos of molecules slamming against each other. For the first time tonight, doubt clawed at her. What if she couldn't do it? What if she failed here, in front of them all? Her vision blurred for a moment. She saw her family's faces, her mother waiting for her call, her siblings studying by candlelight, depending on the money she sent. She couldn't fail them. She couldn't. Yet as she approached the machine, hands trembling, it all came crashing down. The gauges spiked unpredictably. The heat panels flared, alarms screeched. She's losing it, someone whispered. She's in over her head, another sneered. A maid pretending to be a scientist, a woman muttered. Their words cut deep, each one a blade. Amina's hands shook harder. She pressed the wrong sequence of controls, and the chamber roared angrily. The pressure gauge slammed into the red. Gasps filled the hall. Guards reached for safety switches. Khalid raised his hand to stop them, eyes locked on Amina like a hawk watching prey. The chamber hissed violently. If she didn't stabilize it within seconds, the prototype would fail catastrophically. Amina staggered back, sweat dripping down her temple. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Her father's voice felt far away now, drowned out by fear and humiliation. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was nothing more than a maid who had reached too far. Her knees wavered. Her chest tightened. She whispered, almost broken. I can't. The audience gasped. Some laughed cruelly. The trap was closing, and even she could see no way out. In that moment, with the machine threatening to explode and her dignity on the line, Amina stood on the edge of her darkest hour. And Khalid? He leaned back in his chair, watching with quiet satisfaction. The machine hissed like a beast on the verge of breaking free, gauges trembling at the red line. Guests scrambled back in fear, murmurs swelling into chaos. Amina's hands hovered uselessly over the controls, her vision blurred by tears she couldn't blink away. Her breath came ragged, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on her like chains. I can't, she whispered again, shaking her head. I can't. For the first time in years, she felt small again. Just a maid. Just the girl who scrubbed floors while others wore lab coats. Just a dreamer with no right to stand among the powerful. And then, a memory flickered. She was 16 again, crouched by her father's workshop, watching him repair a battered generator with only scraps of wire and his bare hands. Power had gone out across the neighborhood, candles flickered, and people mocked him for trying. But he worked silently, sweat glistening under the lantern, until at last the machine roared back to life. The street filled with light. Her father had looked at her then, his eyes fierce despite his exhaustion. Amina, the world will give you broken systems and laugh when you try to fix them. But listen to me, my daughter, there is no problem without a path. You don't fail when you can't see the answer. You fail when you stop looking for it. The memory hit her like a spark in darkness. Her tears stilled. Her breathing slowed. No problem without a path, she whispered. The chaos of the banquet hall blurred into silence. The hissing machine, the laughter, the fear, it all faded. In her mind's eye, she saw not chaos but patterns, heat flow, entropy balance, energy transfer. The system wasn't failing. It was screaming its secret. Her eyes darted back to the schematics. She had been reading it wrong. The stabilizer wasn't missing, it was misapplied. They had tried to control entropy directly, but entropy couldn't be caged. It had to be redirected, balanced through a second path. Her heart steadied. Her father's voice echoed, "There is no problem without a path." Slowly, Amina reached for the controls again. The crowd jeered. She's trying again? She'll make it worse. Shut it down before it explodes. But Khalid didn't move. His sharp eyes narrowed, watching. Amina's fingers danced over the controls. She bypassed the faulty stabilizer, rerouting the heat flow through an auxiliary channel no one else had noticed. The pressure gauge trembled violently, then began to fall. Murmurs spread. Guests craned their necks. The red danger light dimmed to orange, then yellow. Her voice was steady now, clear, commanding. You don't suppress entropy. You redirect it. Balance the generation against flow, and the system stabilizes itself. She made the final adjustment. The machine let out one long hiss, then settled into silence. The gauges leveled, the heat panels calmed. For the first time since its creation, the prototype stabilized perfectly. The hall went utterly still. And then, applause erupted like thunder. Professors leapt to their feet. Engineers cried out in disbelief. Even ministers and businessmen clapped, some with awe, others with shame for having doubted. Amina stood before them all, chest rising, sweat glistening on her brow, not as a maid, but as a scientist, an innovator, a lioness who had found her roar. Khalid remained seated, his face unreadable. But in his eyes burned something different now, not arrogance, not amusement, but respect. And perhaps fear. Have you ever had a moment when you were about to give up, but something deep inside reminded you to keep fighting? What was it? Share your story below, backhand index pointing down. The banquet hall was alive with thunderous applause, the sound echoing off marble pillars and golden chandeliers. Men who had laughed minutes earlier were now shouting words like genius and visionary. Women who had whispered maid now whispered scientist. But in the eye of the storm, Amina stood calm, her hands still resting lightly on the machine she had tamed. Her chest rose and fell, her eyes locked on the one man whose approval had not yet come. Khalid Al-Mansur sat motionless, his powerful figure framed by the opulence of his throne-like chair. His fingers tapped once against the armrest. Twice. Then he rose. The applause faltered into silence as all eyes shifted to him. The billionaire walked forward, his footsteps sharp on the marble, until he stood face to face with Amina. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice low but carrying the weight of command, he asked, "Who are you?" The question rang out like a challenge. Amina lifted her chin. Her voice did not shake. "I am Amina Yusuf, daughter of a mechanic, made by necessity, physicist by birth, and the woman who solved what your empire could not." The hall gasped. Someone shouted, "Brilliant!" Another whispered, "Unbelievable courage." Khalid's jaw tightened. His eyes burned into hers. "You realize," he said slowly, "that what you have done tonight has embarrassed me in front of the most powerful people in this city." Murmurs rose again. Some feared for her. Others braced for his wrath. But Amina did not flinch. "I did not come here to embarrass you. You offered a challenge. I solved it. Twice on the board. Once on your machine. You promised $700 million. Will you honor your word, or will the world see that Khalid Al-Mansur's word means nothing?" Her words struck like a blade. Gasps rippled through the room. For the first time, someone had spoken to Khalid without fear. Khalid stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched. The hall held its breath. And then he laughed. Not mockery this time. Not cruelty. A deep, resonant laugh that filled the chamber. "You," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. You remind me of myself when I was young. Fearless. Hungry. But unlike me, you have one thing I never did, purity. You did not chase money. You chased truth. And for that, you deserve more than 700 million. He turned to his assistant. Prepare the contract. 700 million wired tonight. The hall erupted in astonishment. Some clapped wildly, others shouted in protest. But no one doubted now. The maid had become the master. Amina's knees wavered. She had done it. She had faced humiliation, danger, and doubt, and she had triumphed. But Khalid wasn't finished. He leaned closer, his voice low so only she could hear. You are dangerous, Amina Yusuf. Dangerous in the way only true genius can be. And I would rather have you beside me than against me. Consider this the beginning, not the end. His eyes gleamed with something deeper than respect, calculation, opportunity. The hall roared with chaos. Professors surged forward to shake her hand. Ministers begged for a word. Photographers shoved for a picture of the black maid who had humbled billionaires. And in that storm, Amina stood tall, not as a servant, but as a force the world could no longer ignore. If you were Amina, would you take Khalid's money and walk away forever, or would you accept his offer to work with him, knowing it could mean even more power, but also danger? What would you choose? Backhand index pointing down. The hall was chaos. Professors buzzing, billionaires arguing, ministers rushing forward with outstretched hands. The cameras flashed endlessly, capturing the image of Amina standing beside the stabilized chamber, chalk dust still on her fingers, her uniform still marked with the faint stains of her work. But no one saw a maid anymore. They saw a force. Amina's chest rose and fell as she looked out over the sea of faces. For years she had scrubbed their tables, poured their champagne, bowed her head so they would not see her eyes. Tonight, she stood taller than all of them. The assistant returned moments later with a sleek folder. Khalid took it, signed swiftly, and handed it to Amina before the eyes of the world. $700 million, he announced, his deep voice echoing. Wired to this woman. Tonight. Gasps rippled across the hall. Some clapped wildly, others whispered in disbelief. A professor wiped his eyes, whispering, she deserves more than all of us. Amina held the contract in her trembling hands. It was heavy, not just with money, but with proof. Proof that brilliance could not be silenced, no matter the uniform. Proof that her father's words had not been in vain. She lifted her gaze to Khalid. For the first time, their eyes met as equals. I don't need your empire, she said softly. I will build my own. The words hit the hall like lightning. For a moment, silence. Then, thunderous applause. Khalid's smile tightened, but there was a glint of respect, perhaps even admiration. Then may the world remember this night as the night a maid became a queen. Weeks later, headlines blazed across the globe. Black maid solves billionaire's challenge, wins $700 million. From Lagos to Dubai, the genius who humbled the elite. Amina Yusuf launches Clean Energy Initiative for Africa. With her winnings, Amina returned to Nigeria first. She rebuilt her father's workshop into a research center. Her siblings had proper schools, her mother lived without worry, and villages once dark at night now glowed with renewable energy from systems she herself designed. She funded scholarships for girls across Africa, whispering her father's words into their futures. There is no problem without a path. And every evening, when the sun dipped low, she would stand on the rooftop of her new institute, listening to the hum of lights across the town, proof that her brilliance had not only saved her, but illuminated thousands. A maid no more. A billionaire in wealth. But greater still, a billionaire in impact. Her roar had been heard, and it would echo for generations. What lesson did you take from Amina's story? That brilliance can come from anywhere? That promises must be honored? Or that courage is the true key to victory? Share your thoughts. I'd love to read them. Backhand index pointing down. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.